You can smell the suffocating stench of rotting, damp wood, salty seawater, and human sweat, which has become deeply ingrained in every crevice of this cramped space. Your world has suddenly shrunk to the size of a single rough-hewn oak bench, to which you are now chained by a heavy iron ring. All around you, there is a constant, deafening screech of massive oars and the piercing shouts of the overseers, completely drowning out the natural sound of the Mediterranean waves. You cannot simply stand up, straighten your weary back, or take even a single step to the side to ease your unbearable physical suffering. This was the terrifying and merciless reality faced by medieval galley slaves around the year 1500. Listen to the sharp, piercing whistle of the comitras, echoing over the heads of hundreds of exhausted and starving rowers. Feel on your own skin the searing blow of a heavy leather whip, which shows no mercy to the naked and emaciated human body. Our journey will begin in the dark streets of Milan and lead us to the very epicenter of a massive maritime disaster. Watch this video all the way to the end to understand the terrible price that had to be paid for the imperial ambitions of 16th century rulers. History reveals its darkest chapters, and we begin this detailed journey into the depths of human suffering. The hot dust of your native Milanese streets was your last pleasant memory, before the guards roughly threw you onto the stone pavement. An ordinary day began as usual, but the petty theft of a wallet from a wealthy foreign merchant turned into a complete disaster. You were caught red-handed right in the market square, without a single chance to escape into the crowd. That reckless act cost you your freedom for many long and agonizing years. The judge saw no reason to waste precious time on lengthy proceedings or to show mercy to a poor city thief. His cold, indifferent voice read out the terrible sentence that forever put an end to your former familiar life. Heavy steel shackles clicked shut around your wrists, robbing you of any hope of escape. Immediately after the trial, a long and grueling march under guard began toward a distant seaport. The guards showed no mercy to the prisoners, driving the exhausted men on with blows from heavy clubs. The dust from the roads choked your lungs, and the iron shackles quickly rubbed the skin on your hands raw until it bled. Every mile of the journey took you farther from home and closer to an unknown, terrifying fate. Finally, a blue strip of sea appeared on the horizon, signaling the end of the journey on foot and the beginning of a new nightmare. The scent of the open sea usually brings to mind thoughts of distant journeys, wealthy lands, and longed-for freedom. However, for a convicted criminal, this salty air smelled only of death and slave labor. In the vast port of Genoa, a massive Spanish military galley rocked at the dock, immediately drawing attention to itself. It resembled a gigantic wooden monster, lying in wait for its new victims. The high sides, rows of long oars, and menacing cannons at the bow instilled genuine terror in everyone who looked at it from the shore. You were roughly shoved forward, forced to walk down a narrow wooden gangplank. You descended into the dark, stuffy, and crowded midsection of this enormous warship. Immediately, a terrible stench of rot, sweat, and old dampness hit your nose. The ship's blacksmith approached you at once, holding a heavy hammer and a set of red-hot iron rings. This man went about his work coolly and without emotion. With a few precise and merciless blows of the heavy hammer, he secured a massive ring around your left ankle. From that moment on, you were firmly chained to a wooden bench, which became your entire world. From that moment on, this simple oak bench was to become your only home, your bed, and the site of constant, grueling labor. Glancing around in the eerie twilight of the deck, you begin to notice that the group of rowers around you is far from homogeneous. The people on the ship differed greatly from one another in appearance, behavior, and clothing. The Mediterranean war galleys of that turbulent era employed 3 completely different types of rowers to propel the ship. Each category had its own distinct legal status, although the physical labor remained equally unbearable for everyone without exception. Understanding these internal social distinctions was vital for survival in this harsh, closed system. The first group consisted of free men who voluntarily enlisted in this arduous and dangerous service for the sake of money. On Spanish ships, they were officially called buenas voyas, and they usually occupied the most comfortable positions at the oars. Most of these volunteers were desperate debtors, former criminals, or complete social outcasts with no roof over their heads. Extreme poverty and hunger drove them to the galley when there was simply no other way to survive. They had the legal right to keep their hairstyles, wear normal civilian clothing, and were even issued weapons during boarding actions. Despite their formerly free status, they shared with the rest all the hardships of the scorching sun and physical exhaustion. The second category of rowers, to which you yourselves now belonged, consisted of convicted criminals known as forçados. These were Christian prisoners, sentenced by secular or religious courts for a wide variety of urban crimes. Smugglers, thieves, counterfeiters, and political rebels from all corners of the empire filled the crowded and filthy middle decks of the enormous ship. The state had found a way to turn criminality into a free source of labor for its powerful navy. The heads of these convicts were shaved completely bald so that they could be immediately distinguished from free citizens in the event of a possible escape. Their terms of imprisonment varied greatly, ranging from a few months to full-fledged lifelong slavery on the royal galleys. The third and most wretched group consisted of true, utterly powerless slaves, whom the crew on deck referred to as esclavos. They were mainly Muslim prisoners captured during endless coastal raids and brutal naval battles. These people had absolutely no legal rights, and not even the faintest hope of a lawful end to their servitude. The officers and overseers treated them with extreme cruelty and ruthlessness. The crew viewed them solely as eternal enemy property that deserved no pity. They were chained much more securely than the others, and many wore heavy iron collars with sharp spikes around their necks. All these different people were pressed incredibly close together on narrow wooden benches. The living conditions on deck were striking for their crampedness and complete lack of personal space. 5 or 6 exhausted rowers simultaneously manned a single massive oar, which was several meters long. Space was so limited that your knees were constantly pressed against the back of the person sitting in front of you. While rowing, you had to move in sync. Otherwise, the heavy oar handle could maim or even kill your neighbor. The slightest mistake by one person instantly disrupted the rhythm of the entire bench. From the very first hours on board, constant friction against the rough, unplaned wood began to mercilessly wear away the fabric of your clothes. No one bothered to issue new uniforms to the convicts, so you had to keep wearing the clothes you were arrested in. Literally within a week, all that remained of your once nice shirt were dirty rags. They exposed your pale skin to the salty sea breeze and the scorching rays of the sun. Sea spray hit the exposed parts of your body, causing constant itching and severe irritation. Your skin quickly became covered with blisters, which burst and turned into a solid, painful crust. The heavy metal of the shackles was icy at night and unbearably hot under the midday Mediterranean sun. A short, sturdy chain connected your ankle ring to a massive iron bar running the length of the bench. This ingenious design allowed you to make the necessary back-and-forth movements while rowing. However, it completely ruled out the possibility of taking even a single step to the side or standing up to your full height. You were securely fastened to your workstation, like a part of a massive machine. Any attempt to free yourself without the blacksmith's special key was doomed to failure from the start. The delicate skin beneath the iron ring quickly turned red, became severely inflamed, and was covered with deep, bleeding wounds. Dirty water, sweat, and road dust constantly seeped into these wounds, causing dangerous infections. The constant friction of the heavy metal against the bone created a dull, throbbing pain that never subsided for a single moment. At night, when the ship was at anchor, this pain made it impossible to fall asleep on the hard planks of the bench. The rowers were forced to sleep right at their workstations, huddled against the cold or the stifling heat. Their bodies quickly became exhausted from constant sleep deprivation, hard labor, and meager rations. The early 16th century was a time of uncompromising naval rivalry among the great powers throughout the Mediterranean. The Spanish, French, and Ottoman fleets waged a constant, brutal, and bloody war for control of the rich trade routes. Naval battles took place regularly, claiming the lives of thousands of sailors and soldiers. To wage this large-scale war, each nation required a colossal number of new warships. Shipyards were being built at a rapid pace, but the main shortage remained the manpower needed to propel the vessels. Galleys could not sail without hundreds of strong hands ready to hold heavy oars for hours on end. That is precisely why courts across Europe worked non-stop, regularly supplying the Navy with fresh batches of convicted laborers. Instead of the death penalty or imprisonment, courts increasingly sent able-bodied men to the royal galleys. This was advantageous to the state, which received free labor for its military needs. The law became a harsh instrument for filling the decks of new warships with a living engine. Your petty theft on a dusty Milanese street was merely a tiny cog in this vast, ruthless imperial machine. The system did not see you as a human being. To it, You were merely a unit of labor. When the ship finally began to slowly pull away from the stone pier, physical reality completely took hold of your mind. The noise of the peaceful, familiar harbor gradually faded into the distance, replaced by the ominous creaking of the galley's massive wooden frames and sides. You had finally become a nameless cog in a vast military machine, having completely lost your name and former status. Ahead lay a boundless and alien sea, promising nothing but endless, grueling labor under the harsh supervision of brutal guards. The overseer's commands had already begun to ring out across the deck, forcing everyone to strike the oars in unison. This was the beginning of a long decade, in which every day that passed turned into a brutal and uncompromising battle for survival. Life on a military galley demanded that a person fully accept being chained to a bench 24 hours a day. The very concept of personal space or privacy vanished the moment the heavy shackle lock clicked shut. You could never stand up to your full height, to stretch your stiff limbs, or simply walk around a bit. The chain restricted any movement to a pitiful few centimeters, dictating its own harsh rules of existence. Day and night, the prisoner remained on the same tiny patch of wooden deck. This forced immobility became the first severe test for the psyche of the newly arrived slave. Every biological need and every rare moment of rest had to take place right there on that narrow plank. Over time, the rough wood seemed to become an extension of your own tormented body. The planks gradually soaked up the acrid sweat, fresh blood from open wounds, and bitter tears of despair. Due to constant friction, what remained of one's clothing quickly turned into pitiful rags, leaving the skin completely unprotected. One had to sit on an incredibly hard surface, which was covered with a slippery film from the dampness. For many years, this tiny wooden space replaced the whole world for a person. A brief nap was the greatest luxury, one that had to be literally stolen in the most uncomfortable positions. On this overcrowded deck, there were no warm blankets, soft pillows, or mattresses for rest. All the exhausted rowers could do was dream of a normal human bed after an incredibly hard day. Sleeping was permitted only when the ship was not pursuing the enemy or engaged in battle. Sometimes the officers would order a long-awaited rest, but there was never enough time to recover. The exhausted men would fall asleep instantly as soon as they were given such a rare opportunity to close their eyes. During these brief respites, you had to remain on your bench without moving. The rowers leaned forward low and slept sitting up, clutching the huge heavy oar tightly with both hands. Your head rested on the rough wood of the thick handle, which served as your only firm support. At the same time, the long oar vibrated continuously with every powerful blow of a wave against the ship's side. In such an unnatural and agonizing position, you would spend several agonizing hours until the next command was given. Waking up to the harsh shout of a cruel overseer was often more terrifying than any nightmare. The physical consequences of such constant sleep in a seated position were simply catastrophic for the human spine. The back muscles were regularly seized by violent spasms that made you want to scream at the top of your lungs. The neck joints literally stiffened, making it completely impossible to turn your head normally in any direction. Their legs swelled severely and ached terribly due to the complete lack of proper blood circulation in the cramped iron shackles. Hard physical labor during the day and torturous sleep at night rapidly destroyed even the strongest bodies. Young and strong men were literally turning into weak, hunched-over old men right before our eyes. Waking up in the morning never brought the long-awaited relief to an incredibly exhausted and tormented body. It only brought back the acute sensation of terrible internal stiffness and intense, piercing muscle pain. After just a few grueling months, many rowers were already suffering from dangerous chronic joint inflammation. Because of such serious illnesses, every new stroke of the oar turned into a true sophisticated form of torture. However, you didn't have a single spare second to complain during an active sea voyage. There were no ship's doctors for ordinary slaves, so you had to survive entirely on your own. The most humiliating and terrifying aspect of this existence was the complete lack of basic sanitary conditions. The unfortunate galley slave was forced to relieve himself right where he sat, through the narrow slats of the wooden bench. No one allowed the prisoners to leave their workstations to attend to their natural biological needs. All the foul-smelling waste fell directly into the deep lower hold of the enormous wooden vessel. It mixed with the stagnant bilge water, creating an incredibly horrific and very dangerous environment. This repulsive mass constantly sloshed beneath their feet, with every sharp tilt of the ship. The lower deck instantly became the perfect dark breeding ground for vast swarms of flies. The putrid, filthy water was the primary source of deadly infections that claimed the lives of hundreds of enslaved prisoners. The horrific stench of a war galley could easily be detected several miles before the ship came into view. It was a thick, suffocating mixture of human excrement, rotting old food, and stagnant sweat. The fresh sea breeze was utterly powerless to dispel this dense atmosphere around the cramped rowing stations. The stench permeated the ship's wood so thoroughly that it was impossible to get rid of it. Your exhausted respiratory tracts grew accustomed to this daily sanitary nightmare fairly quickly. Over time, this dreadful stench became your constant and utterly familiar environment. New prisoners often fainted or suffered from severe nausea due to such a thick odor. The first few days on the ship were always a living hell for their sense of smell and delicate stomachs. But the old, experienced rowers simply stopped paying any attention to the surrounding stench of decay. Their bodies had fully adapted to the unbearable conditions, shutting down basic human reactions of revulsion. To prevent widespread epidemics and the complete destruction of the crew, the officers periodically conducted a sanitation ritual. Excessive mortality among the chained slaves could easily lead to the ship coming to a standstill in the middle of the sea. Therefore, about once a week, the harsh overseers ordered all rowers to lean back as far as possible. The prisoners raised their chained legs high, completely clearing the space beneath their filthy benches. Then ordinary sailors generously doused the planks with icy seawater and sour vinegar from huge buckets. This caustic liquid was meant to wash away the main layers of grime and somewhat destroy dangerous bacteria. The process of washing the deck was always accompanied by thick clouds of acrid steam and a sharp intensification of the stench. For the chained rowers themselves, this cleansing ritual resulted in a new wave of unbearable physical suffering. The icy seawater instantly soaked through your filthy prison rags, cooling your burning skin. Your frozen, weakened body would begin to shake violently from the piercing ocean chill and strong wind. The stark contrast between the scorching southern sun and the icy water often led to fatal colds. No one ever allowed the prisoners to change into dry clothes after this brutal cleaning was over. In addition to the bone-chilling cold, the aggressive cleansing vinegar solution itself posed a huge problem. The acidic, caustic vinegar penetrated deep into the open wounds and torn calluses on your tortured skin. It caused an incredibly sharp, literally blinding pain that was nearly impossible to endure. Dozens of adult men screamed loudly in unison from the burning sensation as the liquid ran down their wounded legs. Nevertheless, this agonizing procedure was the only available way to contain the spread of the deadly plague. It was much easier for the officers to inflict pain on the rowers than to lose their entire valuable crew to a contagious disease. Countless tiny parasites were your most faithful and incredibly cruel companions every single minute. Body lice, bed bugs, and fleas had firmly settled in the deep, dark cracks of the dry wood of the benches. They thrived in the filthy seams of your pitiful, long unwashed prison rags. These vile insects mercilessly bit into inflamed skin, constantly causing terrible, unrelenting itching. Scratching the bites with dirty fingers inevitably led to the rapid formation of dangerous, pus-filled boils. Hands chained to heavy oars could not even quickly brush biting flies away from a sweaty face. At night, another terrifying scourge appeared in the form of brazen and very hungry rodents. Large ship rats boldly ran across the bare feet of sleeping people in search of any food. They meticulously scoured the absolute darkness of the lower deck for tiny scraps of dried-up food. The skin on your body underwent terrifying changes in just a few months at sea. Constant contact with salty seawater severely dried out the epidermis, leading to deep, painful cracks. The scorching sun mercilessly burned your exposed shoulders, turning them into a solid, bleeding mass of peeling skin. Huge, rock-hard black calluses had formed on your palms from constant friction. Your fingers had gradually taken on an unnatural, half-bent shape, forever imprinted with the contours of the massive oar handle. This slow physical destruction was specifically designed to completely break a person's will. The brutal system systematically destroyed every manifestation of human dignity, leaving only the animal instinct for survival. You were no longer a free citizen of Milan, having been reduced to a faceless and powerless unit of muscle. Caught in this epicenter of suffering, you had to find a way to keep your sanity from slipping into complete madness. Human survival in these inhuman conditions depended directly on the meager rations allocated by the state. The meager daily ration for a rower on a Spanish warship consisted of exactly 750 grams of dry hardtack. This hardtack was baked many months before the voyage began and, over time, became as hard as a seaside rock. On ordinary days, the unfortunate prisoners were not entitled to any other food at all. People had to save every crumb, for this stale piece of bread was supposed to sustain them for long days on end. To swallow this dry mass without breaking their teeth, the prisoners had to soak the pieces in water for a long time. Often, these hardtack loaves were brought aboard the ship already completely infested with weevil larvae and covered with a thick layer of green mold. The starving men were forced to eat this disgusting slop along with the worms, closing their eyes in revulsion. No one would have bothered to scrape off the mold, and the overseers never gave them time to do so anyway. Every meal turned into a real ordeal for the stomach, but they had no choice. Fresh water on the galley was worth its weight in gold and was distributed under the strictest supervision of the officers. Storage space on the cramped military vessel was severely limited, so supplies were saved for emergencies. Each chained prisoner was allotted exactly 1 liter of clean, or at least clear water per day. This meager amount was barely enough to sustain the fading life in an emaciated body. Water was distributed once a day, and everyone awaited this moment with both fear and hope. The liquid was stored in large old wooden barrels, where it quickly spoiled under the southern sun. The water became warm and slimy, acquiring a persistent putrid taste and smell. During intense and arduous rowing, this amount was catastrophically insufficient to quench their agonizing thirst. The exhausted men constantly fantasized about the cool mountain streams of their homeland as they gulped down this stagnant, foul-smelling sludge from an iron mug. Their dry lips cracked until they bled, and their throats constantly burned from the unbearable salty air. Sundays brought a small and long-awaited change to this dreary culinary nightmare. Once a week, under the watchful eye of the vigilant guards, the ship's cook distributed a modest portion of salted peas or lentils among the rowers. This simple mixture of legumes was perceived by the starving men as a truly exquisite festive treat. The hot stew provided their exhausted bodies with the necessary plant-based protein and a little energy to continue their labor. The rowers carefully licked their wooden bowls until they shone, trying to preserve every tiny particle of this rare dish. However, on long sea voyages, this already meager food supply would instantly become a complete disaster. Spanish military galleys were built exclusively for high speed and maneuverability in battle, not for carrying heavy cargo. The ship's holds were too small, so they were physically unable to remain far from the coastline for long. Any delay in the voyage due to a calm or a storm threatened the entire crew with starvation. For this reason, as the distance between stops increased, the command was forced to cut the rowers' rations in half. On such dark days, you had to work at the very limit of your physical strength, receiving only half a stale piece of bread. Your body did not get the necessary nourishment, but the overseers demanded the same speed and effort from every oar. Fainting from hunger became a common occurrence on deck, and no one paid any attention to it. If the ship encountered a calm lasting several days in the middle of the open sea, supplies could run out completely. Then the rowers turned into veritable living skeletons, barely having the strength to hold a wooden oar. Constant hunger became a tangible physical burden that mercilessly weighed down on the entire deck of the ship. The rowers' muscles rapidly wasted away as their exhausted bodies began to literally devour themselves for the sake of momentary survival. The sharp ribs stood out clearly through the skin of the unfortunate prisoners, blackened by the sun and salt. Many men became too weak to hold their end of the heavy wooden oar during a violent storm. If an exhausted man finally lost consciousness from exhaustion, he could count on neither sympathy nor help from the officers. Cruel and uncompromising discipline on the rowing deck was enforced by a special overseer. In the Spanish fleet, this fearsome figure was known as a cometer. He paced ceaselessly along the tall central platform that ran the length of the ship between the rows of benches. From this vantage point, he vigilantly surveyed the rows of chained men, noting the slightest signs of fatigue or discontent. In his hands, he always held the 3 main symbols of his boundless and terrifying power over the lives of others. A loud silver whistle hung from his thick neck, and in his hands he held a heavy leather whip and a mug of cold wine. His appearance on the platform always sparked a wave of wild fear and instant physical tension among the rowers. Every prisoner tried to show the utmost diligence, just to avoid drawing the attention of this executioner. The commander had the right to execute or pardon any slave at his own discretion. To him, you were nothing more than working cattle who had to unquestioningly obey any orders from the command. This overseer could leisurely sip his chilled wine for hours, while the exhausted slaves dripped with sticky sweat right at his feet. Such a stark contrast between his comfort and your terror was a key element of the constant psychological pressure. His sharp silver whistle completely controlled every rhythm of your miserable life, forcing your exhausted body to move in a purely mechanical manner. A single long, piercing blast signaled an immediate return to the galley's normal, economical pace. A series of short, rapid whistles demanded that the rowers shift to maximum combat speed during the pursuit of the enemy. At the slightest sign of slowing down, or the hint of disobedience, the commander would immediately bring out his dreaded leather weapon. He would strike the bare body of the offending, or simply exhausted rower, with tremendous force and without the slightest warning. The heavy whip instantly lacerated the dry skin until it bled, leaving deep, jagged scars. These wounds were immediately corroded by sea salt flying in from all sides, inflicting new, unbearable torment on the captive. From this searing pain, people often lost their minds, yet they continued to stubbornly push the heavy oar forward. None of the chained slaves were allowed to cover themselves with their hands, or try to dodge the brutal blows raining down from above. Any attempt to defend oneself was viewed by the overseer as open rebellion and punished even more severely. This ferocious leather whip served as a constant and very vivid reminder that your life belonged entirely to the Spanish crown. You could be beaten to death right there on that bench, and none of the officers would bother to investigate. The corpse would simply be thrown into the depths of the sea to make room for a new prisoner. Any attempt at deliberate sabotage or damage to valuable ship's property was punished with the utmost exemplary cruelty in full view of the entire crew. If an exhausted rower deliberately broke an oar or tried to damage the sturdy lock on his chain, bloody retribution followed immediately. Armed guards would cold-bloodedly seize the culprit and force his head against the galley's main wooden side. With a sharp knife, the ship's executioner would cut off the unfortunate rebel's ears right there on the spot to intimidate the other slaves. The bleeding man, without any medical assistance, was roughly thrown back onto the bench to continue the grueling rowing. An open mutiny, or an attempt to organize a mass uprising, always resulted in the immediate application of the death penalty. The ringleaders of the unrest were never granted even a brief trial or the opportunity to say a single word in their own defense. The guards quickly and ruthlessly suppressed any resistance with firearms and heavy steel blades. Afterward, the surviving leaders of the uprising were crucified for the mutiny right on the ship's mainmast under the scorching sun. Their death throes echoed for hours over the silent sea, serving as a terrifying visual warning to the rest of the tormented crew on deck. The daily life of a galley slave followed the seasons of the sailing year. Military campaigns usually began in early spring, when the winter storms had finally subsided. The heavy galley would slowly leave the dry dock, its fresh paint gleaming over the rotten wooden planks. For a former thief from the streets of Milan, every new voyage out to sea was a step into the abyss. The Spanish fleet regularly patrolled the turbulent waters between Italy, Greece, and the treacherous coast of North Africa. The very act of handling the massive galley oar required complex and coordinated physical effort. You had to rise abruptly from the bench, thrust the handle forward, and plunge the blade into the water. After that, you had to pull the oar toward you with all your might, falling back onto the oak seat. This grueling exercise was repeated thousands of times during a single endless day or night shift. All around was the incessant creaking of wood, the clanging of iron chains, and the heavy crash of salty sea waves. The summer heat turned the ship's open deck into a veritable branch of hell on earth for all the rowers. There were no awnings over the benches to protect their skin from the direct rays of the midday sun. The wood heated up so much that it literally burned the bare feet of the men tied to it. Severe dehydration caused their tongues to swell and deep cracks to form on the rowers' chapped lips. Heat stroke regularly claimed the lives of the weakest prisoners during long pursuits of the enemy. The winter months brought with them a completely different kind of unbearable physical hardship for the exhausted crew. Freezing rain and stormy waves regularly engulfed the defenseless rowing ranks up to their heads. Without warm clothing, the men shivered for hours in the bitter cold, unable to warm themselves. Dangerous pneumonia and lung infections spread rapidly among the prisoners crammed onto the benches. Their numb fingers could barely grip the slippery wood of the massive oars. Quality medical care on a 16th century warship was completely out of reach for ordinary convicts. The ship's sole surgeon devoted all his attention exclusively to the officers and sailors. To the ship's command, a sick rower was viewed merely as a broken part of the great wooden vessel. If you lost the ability to row effectively, you were quickly replaced by a fresh prisoner. Men who were completely beyond hope or dying were often simply thrown overboard to conserve drinking water. The constant psychological pressure of being so close to death was an incredibly grueling ordeal for the mind. Every day, you were forced to watch your cellmates go mad and die. A man might have been talking to you at dawn, only to become a lifeless corpse by noon. You had to help the guards remove the shackles from his cold body and push him into the water. No funeral rites or prayers were ever held for the nameless convicts on the ship. Nevertheless, human nature is capable of adapting even to the most monstrous conditions of existence. Over time, strong bonds of unspoken mutual aid and support formed among the rowers on a single bench. The stronger men often took on the bulk of the workload to protect a weakened comrade from the whip. Quiet whispers were exchanged during the rare hours of the night when the harsh overseers went to sleep. Rare news from the distant outside world sometimes made its way onto the deck, along with new prisoners. The first 5 years of your court-imposed sentence flew by in this monotonous cycle of pain. Your body had completely transformed, becoming a rigid mass of lean muscles and rough scars. Memories of the dusty streets of Milan gradually faded, replaced by the endless blue horizon of the sea. You knew by heart every crack in your bench and every nuance of the cruel overseer's whistle. The hope of release was a dangerous feeling, capable of easily shattering a person's fragile mental resilience. The overall geopolitical situation around your shores grew increasingly alarming with each passing year. The mighty Ottoman Empire was actively pushing its naval borders westward into Christian waters. Spanish warships were constantly on high alert, watching for enemy sails. Random skirmishes between individual vessels were becoming more frequent, marked by particular brutality and bloodshed. The characteristic smell of gunpowder smoke began to mingle regularly with the constant, heavy stench of the ship's hold. Vague rumors of an impending massive naval battle began to circulate among the rowers in early 1571. The leading Christian powers were forming a powerful alliance to put a permanent stop to the large-scale Turkish expansion. Every available galley was hastily repaired, equipped with cannons, and manned by hand-picked professional soldiers. You could clearly sense the mounting tension among the ship's senior officers. A veritable storm was brewing over the Mediterranean, and you were right in its path. The climactic and most terrifying moment of your long 10-year imprisonment arrived on a cool autumn morning. In history, this day is recorded as the Battle of Lepanto on October 7, 1571. The combined fleet of the Holy League unexpectedly clashed with the colossal armada of the ruler of the Ottoman Empire. Two massive naval forces clashed in a deadly battle near the Gulf of Patras. For hundreds of rowers chained to their seats, this event marked the beginning of an absolute, indescribable nightmare. The sheer scale of the military forces assembled for this battle was truly unprecedented for that era. The Christian alliance fielded exactly 220 Christian galleys against the formidable Turkish enemy. They were opposed by a massive and well-trained fleet numbering about 250 Ottoman vessels. Nearly 100,000 armed men were crammed onto these floating wooden platforms. The air was literally thick with a sense of foreboding, of imminent, massive, and merciless human death. The brutal battle began with the deafening, continuous roar of heavy naval artillery and cannons. Thick black smoke instantly shrouded the entire water's surface, completely blocking out the morning sun. The merciless commander blew his whistle frantically, demanding maximum speed from the rowers. You had to pull the oars with your last ounce of strength, overcoming the excruciating pain in your muscles. Heavy enemy cannonballs crashed through the hulls, turning the wood into clouds of deadly splinters. It was precisely these sharp wooden splinters that were the main killers on the crowded deck during battle. A single well-aimed Turkish cannonball could shatter an oar into splinters, instantly maiming all the rowers. Hot blood flowed in streams across the deck, making the wet wood incredibly slippery. You had to completely ignore the terrifying screams of dying men, right on your bench. The slightest pause in your movement would result in an immediate and brutal lash from the overseer's whip. Your Spanish galley, at full speed, rammed the Turkish ship with a terrible, deafening crash. Elite soldiers, shouting fierce battle cries, instantly rushed across the gangplanks to storm the enemy deck. A brutal hand-to-hand battle raged directly above your heads on the upper gun deck. Shards of steel blades, empty cartridge casings, and the bodies of slain warriors rained down right onto the rowers. You remained locked in your wooden cage, unable to defend your own life. The long hours of the great battle flew by in a continuous chaos of smoke, fire, and superhuman effort. Your wounded hands bled, your lungs choked on gunpowder fumes, but you kept rowing. The Christian warriors used their superiority in firearms to gradually crush the Janissaries' resistance. One by one, the Ottoman ships began to catch fire and slowly sink to the bottom of the sea. The overall course of this massive battle finally turned in favor of the Holy League's forces. When the roar of the cannons finally fell completely silent, a heavy stillness hung over the wave-tossed waters. The Christian alliance had won a complete and crushing victory over the Turkish Sultan's vast armada. Hundreds of burning enemy ships slowly sank into the dark depths of the Mediterranean. The price of this triumph was incredibly high, amounting to many thousands of casualties on both sides. However, for the prisoners chained to their benches, the greatest miracle of the day was just beginning. Immediately after the battle ended, the victorious soldiers began searching the captured Turkish ships. Descending into the dark and foul-smelling holds of the enemy vessels, they froze at the sight before them. There, following the victory, 12,000 chained Christian slaves were found on the Turkish galleys. These unfortunate people had spent years praying to God for deliverance, while toiling under the lashes of the Ottomans. The jubilant warriors immediately began using heavy axes to break their massive iron chains. The sound of metal splitting under the blows of the axe was the most beautiful music you had ever heard. The captain of your own galley issued an official order to free all the surviving Christian convicts. The ship's blacksmith approached your bench, holding heavy tools for prying open the rings. The sturdy iron ring that had shackled your left ankle for 10 years fell with a clang. You were finally able to stand up to your full height for the first time and feel the sea breeze on your face. Looking around at the wrecked and blood-soaked deck, you could hardly believe you had been saved. Your long 10-year sentence ended not in a port prison, but amid great glory. An ordinary thief from Milan had endured the most terrible physical ordeal of the harsh 16th century. You've gained your long-awaited freedom, though your scarred body will bear these marks for the rest of your days. The horrific hell of the Mediterranean galleys is now forever behind you, reduced to a painful memory. The harrowing history of the Mediterranean war galleys remains one of the darkest monuments to human cruelty. Thousands of nameless people spent the prime of their lives, chained fast to rough wood. Their true story was written not in ink, but in sweat, blood, and the unbearable stench of vinegar. Official chronicles often remember only the names of great monarchs and the brilliant tactical maneuvers of admirals. However, the true driving force of that distant era was always the faceless galley slave on the bench. As you leave the ship's deck, you'll immediately notice that your gait has been forever altered by the iron. The phantom weight of the shackle ring will continue to pull your left leg toward the ground for many years to come. Your twisted fingers will never be able to fully straighten after a decade of continuously gripping an oar. The sharp sound of an ordinary referee's or military whistle will cause your muscles to contract reflexively. You manage to survive this nightmare, but a part of your soul remains forever on that bench. For several centuries, this horrific reality served as the solid foundation of European maritime power. It paradoxically combined cutting-edge engineering with utterly primitive cruelty toward human beings. The period around 1500 and the Great Battle of Lepanto have gone down in history textbooks. But the true cost of these resounding victories is measured solely in terms of individual human suffering. Every wave that crashed against the ship's side carried with it the quiet sighs of dying rowers. We sincerely thank you for joining us on this deep dive into history. If this immersive story has made you reflect on the price of freedom, please support the growth of our channel. Share your thoughts on what you've read in the comments below this video right now. Be sure to like the video and turn on notifications so you don't miss new episodes. Stay curious, explore the hidden facets of the past, and see you soon in our next videos.